Hey, Fred, Anil from Live, Breathe, Believe. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Anil. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. After we had our chat on elevated coaching, listening, empowering, and following up, I wanted to follow up with you because I had I've had some tough conversations in the last week or two where I'm trying to crack um, something and change. Does change come from within, from what you've learned and what you've understood, and therefore what you want to do and become? Or is change kind of almost directed by somebody? So maybe by
hmm
a coach, by a friend, by a family member. So I kind of wanted to just start by asking you, um, how would you help me if I'm in that kind of mode to understand what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, so that way if you're going to help me change or grow, you're not telling me what to do, what I should do, but you're almost helping me understand and then almost helping me
Mm,
nurture that growth from within.
yeah. So the first part comes back to listening. So in that spirit, do you want to tell me more about specifically, like if something happened or what you're feeling right now?
Yeah. So, whether it's, my career and how I know what is best for my next step, whether it comes to my training and am I actually applying what I've learned versus what I'm told to do, um, when it comes to even my girlfriend. And I kind of, I'd love to see a change in her. And I'm sure she'd love to see a change in me. I almost want to say, like, you should. I was just actually on a call and, leadership said, you should feel, you should be grateful, you should be thankful, you should be, you should. And it's like, why are you telling me what I should do? That makes me feel really uneasy.
Mm,
And in response, I want to tell the person, no, stop. Like, don't tell me what to do. You need to do less of that. And again,
mm,
but that would be kind of almost doing
true.
the same thing in return, as
That's
opposed
true. Yeah,
to,
yeah, that's a good
so
point.
it's almost wanting to break that loop of, okay, I've listened
Yeah.
to what you said, thank you, and then making sure that the change comes from me and not from what I'm being told to do or what I should do or how I
Absolutely.
should feel.
So, what do you wish leadership had said in that situation, based on what you know?
um I wish they maybe spoke a bit less and they kind of empathize with the audience to kind of understand, what is going through people's minds. And, you know, uh, I'm even thinking of a conversation with a friend. I'm even thinking of a conversation again with my girlfriend. Like, I kind of want them to almost, I'd like for them to understand, like, okay, this person is capable of growth. I have faith in this person's, they value growth.
Mm,
And knowing that they value growth, if I were to offer information or offer advice, they would take it on, but it can stop there. It doesn't need to go further with kind of almost, you should.
right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what do you think? Do you think most other people are interested in growth?
You know, who I want to be an optimist and say, yes, I do feel people want growth. I think it's the appetite for growth, right? Some
Mm,
people are kind of like, I want to nibble. Some
yeah.
people might feel like, I want to feast. And I do feel it's all about baby steps. And some people have the ability to grow and change, like from
Mm.
the start. And for others, it maybe takes place over time as they experience and learn and almost understand that they need to.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm getting from that is some people are willing to wanting to change you very explicitly or wanting to direct you to feel a certain way.
Mhm.
Um, and you would like to be treated in a slightly different way, where since you are interested in growing, you're listening, you're reflective, you would like to be more involved in that process. You want it to be heard and that you could become part of figuring out how to change, how to you know feel a certain way if that's the right feeling. And I do think there's a difference between people who are very open to growth and some people who are not. So you think you would treat people differently based on their appetite for growth or how open they seem to having open-ended conversations, or is it something like that? Maybe like some difference there between different people.
So if I put myself into a manager or
Mm-hmm.
coach position, right? I think you need to. I think you need to adapt. I think
Right.
it's more of a you adapt your style rather than be different. I think you need to still be yourself, but you almost either ask more questions or ask less questions, have a shorter conversation or have a longer conversation. I think you need to almost adapt. Um, but I think it's again going back to kind of why am I having this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what's the desired outcome, the desired result, just like so you just have you're mentally prepared before that conversation. So you're you're not treating them differently, you're just your approach is different. You still treat them with the same level of respect. And like I look to
Right.
you as a coach, you're not going to treat one coachee different than another. Your approach will be adapted based on one coachee's appetite
Mm.
versus another, right?
So in that spirit, how would you, if you see that someone is very willing to grow and they're very open to feedback, maybe, or
Mhm.
whatever those parameters might be that you look for, how would you talk to them, or how would you approach a conversation with them?
And it's a deep and tough question, but at the same time, just to keep it simple, I think I would approach it with again bite sized. I would, it's almost like first I would kind of say, hey, what would you like from me? And
Mm-hmm.
then based on that, I would want to factor that into, okay, let me listen maybe a little bit more. Or maybe you don't need to listen much. It's let me just give you just enough bite-sized ideas or thoughts that they can take away. And if it's really that important to them, they'll come back and ask for more
Mm.
or seek more. And based on what they're experiencing, it's almost like, again, it's baby steps, right? If I tell someone, hey, go for a sprint, and they're kind of like, yeah, but I'm still learning to crawl, giving them advice on how to sprint is not the right place. It's almost step
Mm.
by step. Um, and let me also back up. I think it's also establishing trust with that person, knowing it comes from a good place. And so if I'm going to offer advice to you or my ideas or my thoughts, do you trust that they come from a good place?
Yeah.
And if that person trusts that, they'll be more likely to absorb what they're being offered rather than put up a shield or a guard and kind of almost go, stop, you know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
may be
Mm-hmm.
looking at you, you may be seeing, but I'm not digesting, I'm not
Mm.
processing what you're
I
saying.
think that makes a lot of sense. And it seemed like we started at the easier end of the spectrum, which is how you'd have the conversation with someone who is clearly focused on their own growth.
Mhm.
Um, and you mentioned, it seemed like you mentioned being straight with them, listening to them, building trust. Uh, those seem like great components. So, what about the other end of the spectrum that you mentioned, which I think is trickier? So,
Where
I
they're
guess
not
someone,
as, they're a
yeah.
bit more headstrong or stubborn or not as,
Yeah. Is that the
um,
opposite end of the spectrum from focused on growth?
it's a good question. I'd say, yeah, because you think about the whole
Yeah.
growth mindset, right? So one
Mm-hmm.
person might be
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
on that end, like, yeah, hit me with more, give me more, give me more. On the other side, it's like, um, I've got this, kind of going back to our conversation on ego. They may have an
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy ego. They're not, they're hearing a different narrative in their mind about what they're able to do.
Yeah.
I think I would say, I would still want to be straight with them. I would still want to build trust with them. And so I think it's again, but maybe it's embracing it's going to be a bit of a longer journey.
Okay. Yeah.
So that growth won't come about in a month or 2 months. It might take longer. So it's almost pacing yourself,
Mm.
pacing those conversations. Um, and again, I still think it comes back to just knowing your audience, listening more, and asking more questions. And just, I think it goes back to what you said to me last time. It's just the more you listen, I think anyone can be kind of overcome. Their guard can come down. The more they're kind of like, yes, this person's willing to listen, and it's a nurturing conversation as opposed to again a lecture.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because we started with the assumption that these two conversations would be very different and that people were very different. But when you go through intuitively how you'd actually approach it, it turned out to be very similar
Mhm.
with the kind of straight thing, which as well, which you kind of said, I think, like sharing your agenda. You know what your agenda is, and maybe you share it in a more straightforward way. You listen to them, where they're coming from, how they're actually feeling, rather than telling them how to feel, which seems to have put you off. And building the trusting relationship where you feel like whatever is being said, that's like the container for it, or like the channel, right? Like whatever is being said is coming from a good place. And to me, those are amazing conclusions, and they're surprisingly universal, right?
It is. And I honestly, I didn't expect that from the start. Like I thought, okay, maybe it does need to be different. Maybe it does need to be different. I think it comes back to it's just how you do it. So while you're having the
Sure.
conversation is the same. You're hoping to offer advice to provide growth. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to initiate the conversation, as you said, share the agenda up front, or ask the person up front, hey, what do you need
Hmm.
from me? And then, so how do you go about doing it? Well, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Or okay, this person's kind of, they're going quite quick. How do we now manage the pace to ensure that there's sustainable growth and not, a one hit wonder and then you fall back?
Yeah.
I still, and this is where I come back to breaking that loop though, of how do you ensure then that you don't tell someone what to do?
Mm.
You find that balance of offering counsel and knowing that they're going to take the counsel and they're the ones that have to live with the outcome, the decision, the choice that they make. Uh, as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
how do you manage that? How do you think about that?
Mm. To be honest, I'm still a little bit stuck on your situation and what you said there,
Okay.
because I thought it was so interesting as well how you turned it around. You picked up on this thing, like you wanted to be treated differently. You
Mm-hmm.
would wish that conversation would have gone a little bit differently, and now you're in the situation where you get to react, but then you don't want to fall into that trap, right? Of doing what you're asking someone else not to do. And I just thought that was a really interesting situation.
Keep going,
So can
then
we stay
keep
on
coming
that?
at me.
Yeah. um, so, given what we now know about how you would like to be treated and how you think this conversation should be held, how would you apply that to getting back to someone, to give them feedback, or to express your feelings, maybe?
I think it's actually that. So rather than offering feedback, I think what I would almost do is kind of go, hey, in the last conversation, I felt this. Um, and based on how I felt, uh, this is what has stuck with me, and this is something that I've discarded. And based on what stuck with me, this is what I'm going to do to kind of almost step by step get to where I want to get to. And I say that, Fred, not that I'm going to have to justify or give the person the plan of attack. And I think that's also a funny one, is not feeling like I need to share too much of my next steps
Mm-hmm.
to almost get their validation, to get their sign off that, yes, I agree. That's a great approach. It's a great idea. Or no, that's not a really good approach. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just finding that, like, okay, this is my next baby step, and that's it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't, so it's finding the balance of how much information I would share back to that person, in terms of this is what I'm going to do. Um, because I think that's also where I don't want to fall into that other trap of, it's not only just being told what to do and telling them, don't tell me what to do, and firing back.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
It's also not falling in the trap of giving too much information to get the validation that I'm on the right track. It's like, if I'm not on the right track, I'm aware enough to know, ooh, I'm off the wrong track. Or a week or two later, hey, dude, you're going off track. Come back. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? And I think that's
Yeah,
where.
I'm not, to be honest, I'm not quite getting that. So the scenario where we were was like, you had this conversation with someone and you weren't quite happy with how it went because you're being told what to do.
Mhm,
So one option or one idea would be to continue that conversation or to get back to them.
mhm,
To We had the idea of telling them how you feel, and then you said again, like not thinking through like 10 steps ahead, but there's something that you come back to, which is like taking steps, breaking it into small chunks. So I think that makes sense. So you're telling them a little bit about how you feel, but it was also something about oversharing. That's where I was.
So yeah, I think so. Let me kind of go back to, so status quo is not an option for me, right? Because I'm a growth minded guy. So to continue to be told what to do doesn't sit well with me. I think in terms of telling how I feel, I'm a bit reluctant. I'm a bit nervous to do that. And the reason why, um, don't know if that person's receptive to it or not. And I feel that I know how I feel. So then that can then lead to the third part, which is I'm going to break into chunks what I do to grow and change. If I need to, I may not need to change. I may be on
Sure.
the right track.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, if the other person sees, hears anecdotes or change, or they observe, then they can go, oh, cool. Like that's clearly this
Mm.
person has changed. Clearly Neil has evolved. Clearly he's, and I think that's how I want to go about it, is letting my change speak for itself.
Right. I think that's a great point. And now I just wanted to also bring it back to the three things that you said before, which was being straight
Mm-hmm.
and listening
Mm-hmm.
and building a trusting relationship. And I think though that was a great summary, because I think that's going to work. If you feel a certain way, or if you have an agenda, something you want to achieve, sharing that can help to have a straightforward conversation. Listening to where they're coming from, like they were very stressed on this particular day, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe they didn't spend enough time to bring people along, and those kind of things can happen. And that you both try to develop a trusting relationship where hey, we actually have the same goals in the grand scheme of things, or we actually want the best for each other. That is a great starting point for that conversation. And you also answered the question that you asked me, which is originally, which is how I would do it as a coach, or how I view it, which is what you just said, that we change people not by telling them what to do, but by doing things a certain way. So the more you're focused on building trusting relationships, just doing that teaches people. It shows people that something is possible. The more you listen, it encourages people to be better listeners. The more straightforward you are, it encourages other people to feel safe being straightforward. So whatever it is, the best way to encourage people to eat healthy food, if that's your kind of thing, is to eat healthy food and be happy, rather than telling everyone that they should follow my particular diet.
Well, and that's what I was writing down here as you said that. I totally agree. It's a, I know one of my mantras now for live big believe is know you to be you, and it's almost like, okay, know you, know what it is you want, and therefore know what it is you're going to do to get there. And I think it's what I what I what I really like about this conversation, and kind of what you've opened my eyes to is, you're right. It's not about, you're not changing people by telling them what to do. It's again, it's doing it in a certain way. And I don't, not everyone's equipped to
Mm.
do that, right? I think we're equipped. If you go back to like parents are equipped to say, hey, you will not eat that, or you will stop crying, or no, you can't. Do you know what I mean? Rather than listening. And I think as we grow up, we almost feel like that's how we need to interact with people is,
Mm.
rather than allowing them and listening to them. Okay, so what are you really feeling? Okay, why do you want to eat that? Okay, does it make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. Then carry on. Okay, they get unhealthy. All right, so you see you're sick. Why do you think you're sick? Okay, you shouldn't have eaten that. Okay, so what do you want to do? And it's like I just find like sometimes life should be a bit more about asking questions and letting people live with, not live with, sorry, almost, okay, if you make a choice and it doesn't work out, cool. Did
Mm.
you learn from it? Yes. So what are you going to do differently? And I think that's the struggle, because I think some people aren't comfortable with that, whether it's the person giving
For
the
sure.
advice or the person receiving the advice. It's almost like this, it's a dance. And I feel like it can be a healthier dance
Yeah.
if there's a, if you're on the same wavelength, or at least you respect each other's
Exactly. And so
positions.
you're saying something earlier, which I think captures that nicely, and which, about being positive and about believing that people want to grow. Or, the thought that was in my mind at that time is believing that people are whole and resourceful, that they want what's best for them and they know what's best for them, which again ties into your live, breathe, believe motto. Not just that I know myself and know what I want, but that other people know that too, or that that's within reach. And that's where both for grown-ups and children, again, I think we're really coming back to this approach
Mhm.
of like understanding where people are coming from, asking them questions about that, giving them information, sharing our agenda if we have one. Um, I think if it's clear with children, you can spend 15 years telling a child what to do and telling them to not talk back and this kind of thing, and then wonder why they don't grow up to take initiative and feel free and that kind of thing. And of course, it's very contradictory to treat people in a certain way and then expect a totally different kind of result. If we want our children to be autonomous and to make their own decisions and to question things and not just believe what everyone tells them, well, then we have to kind of swallow that pill too, or accept and maybe even encourage that our children also question us. It makes everything a little bit harder, but asking where they're coming from, giving the information, as you said, this food is healthy, this food is unhealthy. At least sometimes, maybe they should be allowed to make that choice themselves and see the consequences and have a conversation about health and teeth and all these kind of things that really matter and that they're fundamentally interested in.
And that's why I think it comes back to a lecture versus a conversation. A conversation is two-way, a lecture
Mm-hmm.
is one way. And I mean, I'll tell you, I have friends who in the last 12, 24 months, they've lectured me. They're like, you should not, and why aren't you, and how are you? And and I'm kind of like, I sometimes I just want to be heard. And I'll be blunt with you, Bray. Like growing up, that's one thing I probably wasn't heard enough by my family, my parents. And it's like, I just want to be heard. I want someone to
Mm.
understand my situation. And some people who are maybe a bit more emotional, and I'll raise my hand and say, I am a very emotional guy in that sense. Like, it's like, I just want to be heard, hear me out. Others are kind of like, hey, be bright, be brief, be gone. And and it's, how do you find that balance when you're with someone who wants to be heard? Okay, I'd rather the person then go, you know what? I'm not, I don't have the capacity to listen. There's other people out there that you can go talk to and get advice from. Go for it. As opposed to, I just know how to lecture, so that's just going to be my style. So, and what I've started doing is I've moved away from having conversations and with people who lecture to people who will have conversations where I know if I listen, I'll learn something that I didn't know before, and I hope it's reciprocal. Um,
I totally agree. I think that's a great approach. And I'll put my hand up and say I've had a few years of delivering a lot of lectures. And
yeah, it's
there are a
natural. I
couple of
mean,
things about it. One is that, I had some newfound knowledge and I, you know, felt so strongly about it that I thought that giving these lectures was the best thing I could do. Now I've changed my mind about that. I don't know that that's what that person needs to hear at that particular point in time. Um, I think even if it is, the lecture isn't the best way to do it necessarily. Um, and if we believe that people are whole and resourceful, we would gravitate to this other approach, building a trusting relationship, listening, seeing where they're coming from, sharing our agenda. Because what we end up doing is oftentimes when people give a lecture, they give the lecture that they need to hear. That's also something in a conversation, right?
oh, Fred, I love that. Yes. You almost, and then the advice you'll give is, okay, it's almost like you're telling yourself that, but you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
let
yeah.
me kill two birds with one stone.
Mm.
Okay, now as a coach, do you feel that you fall into that sometimes, like where you're giving advice or you're coaching, and it's almost like you're trying to remind yourself the same thing?
I would like to think that that was trained out of me.
Okay.
uh,
Cool.
because I'm not sure if it came up before in our conversations, but of course I'll have this idea like, oh, Anil should do this. He should say this. And then I sit on my hands for a couple of minutes and just listen. And then maybe you come up with the same idea. And then it's better because it's your idea. Or I wait for a couple of minutes more and you come up with an idea that's even better than the one I had. And then I'm even more glad that I didn't share, my idea, my solution. And after that happens a few times, it's very humbling. And I think now it's becoming more second nature to like, well, this isn't about me. If I have a conversation with a friend, it's actually trickier because then it's like, how long is it okay to talk about me? And when should we change to talk about them? Whereas
Mhm.
with coaching, it's never about me. So that's that clearer and simpler, actually, from that point of view.
I love that. And actually, I've just jotted down here powerful conversations. I think it's, if you have a powerful conversation, it's far more effective and efficient than a powerful lecture,
Mm-hmm.
or a powerful talk.
Yeah,
Sit down.
I
We're going to have
believe
a
that.
talk,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I agree, mate. I think, kids, I think they're smarter than we think. But yeah, I think there's a certain age where it is telling, until they have a bit of a frame of reference where then they can go, okay, actually, you can ask them the question, how are you feeling and why do you feel that way? My sister does that with my nephew and I admire it. I won't lie to you. I'm scared to have kids because when I see how she raises him, I'm like,
Mm.
I don't think I could replicate that because that's just brilliant. And the kid is, like I said, I've talked about him before. He's so smart, and he's a smart ass. But there are times where when she listens to him, she's like, "Oh, okay. So what do you want to do about it?" And suddenly, like giving a 10-year-old opportunity to make a choice is so much more powerful. And
Yeah.
then you can ask them the next day, "So how'd it go? And what
Yeah.
did you think?" And I think sometimes we're so impatient that we almost want to put the answer in the person's mouth and go, see, you did that. And it happened that way, didn't it? I was right. Wasn't like, aha, see, I
Yeah, yeah,
told you
yeah.
so,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than just, so what do you think? Yeah. You had, I'm glad. And I think
Yeah.
that's a funny dynamic.
Absolutely. And I get the feeling as you're saying that one is just like an arrow from one person to the next that doesn't necessarily connect. And the other thing, the conversation you want to have is more like a loop that you
Mhm.
offer something, but they also have to take it in. And then there's the feedback of what they actually did and how it worked. And you're not judging it, you're asking them, how did that work out for you? Uh,
Completely.
so it's like you're going, taking something in and giving something back rather than kind of shooting the arrow across. Something
Completely.
like that. That's
And
how
I
I
think
feel.
you'll naturally build not everyone's in the frame of mind to have a heavy conversation. So it's like almost you need to be mindful of your state of mind and go, hey, actually, you know what? I'm not keen to have it. Can I have a bit of
Mm,
space?
sure.
Or
Yeah.
acknowledge that this person may need a little bit of space. Let me just give them that space. And then when they're ready, because we've got that relationship, they will naturally gravitate back and go, hey, let me talk this through with you. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that it's that acknowledgement of that space and that trust. So I'm going to add that to the list. It's not just being straight and listening and building trust. It's also giving space,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and
very
letting
nice.
that almost kind of, yeah, metabolize, digest, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. 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 I think that's a great addition. And it's interesting because to me, it's like as we're having this conversation, we really develop our intuition for how, that this idea comes up to you. Like, yeah, it's like you're creating a space. And, I can totally get that. And we have now created a space where we can come up with these ideas and we're having a real conversation. And no one is telling anyone else what to think and which idea is good and which idea is bad. And that felt very productive to me. So we're talking about something and also doing it in my mind.
No, and that's, I think the question then is how people from this conversation, by listening to it, watching it, what can they take away from it? And I think
Mm.
again, it goes back to what you said, Fred. It's hey, take from this what you will. This is an open conversation. You may or may not be able to relate to it. If you can relate to it, if you're on one end of the conversation or the other, just be mindful of it's okay. You don't have to necessarily, the conversation can be similar. It doesn't have to be different. The approach may need to be different, but be straightforward, be open, be honest, listen, let the person who wants to be heard be heard. Build trust. If you already have it, great. make it stronger. If you don't have it, give it time. It'll come with the right level of chat and the right level of openness. And then make sure you give that person space before, during, or after the conversation. And again, that goes both ways, because someone's trying to give you advice. It's like, okay, you know what? Go ahead, give me the advice. Cool.
Sure.
And then, because I think sometimes we also have a tendency, if we don't think we're heard, we'll repeat ourselves, and that conversation will just go on a bit longer. And you're like, okay, you made your point. Cool. I won't lie to you. I once had a chat with my sister a couple of years ago, and she was giving me some advice, and I was kind of like, yeah, but she's like, pause. I'm not asking you to respond and react. I'm just going to share this with you. Take it away and digest it. Come back to me later. Tell me what you think. And I think we almost feel like if we're on the receiving end of a conversation, that we almost need to counter. And that's okay. It's okay also just to kind of, again, I think because we want to counter to go, see, I've listened to you, I've heard you, I get you, that validation. And it's like in the middle of that conversation, maybe that's the last thing. Don't seek validation on either side. Just allow the person to marinate. Let them come up with it on their own.
Yeah.
Man, cool. Any other thoughts, Fred?
No, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that I think it was very cool that we had a conversation where these ideas came up organically to give a solution as we went along to the question and thought you had originally. And that basically just emerged because we were listening and adding something and reflecting and asking for clarification and doing some very simple things. And then those, I would say, those flowers bloomed in the middle of the conversation, and we answered our question.
We totally did. And Fred, thank you for that, because I won't lie to you, at the start of the chat, I was a little apprehensive because I wasn't sure, sometimes with our chats, like, it's okay, is this a two-way dialogue, or is this actually like, hey, Fred, this is an opportunity for you to coach me and something that I feel uneasy about. And I think as we went on, I was more comfortable to be more open with you about how I felt. So again, it's not only just putting some of the ideas down, but it's also experiencing it from the start until now. So I appreciate that. Thanks, bud.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, hey, Fred, until next time, take care. And for everyone, big hugs and heaps of love.